Hey, also, the book that I chose to read for our book report was The Boys in the Boat by Daniel James Brown. It was published on June the 4th, 2013, and it's a really good book about the, the oarsmen that competed in the 1936 Olympics um, in Berlin in the middle of Hitler's reign in Germany. And it just goes through mostly the life of Joe Rance. He was one of the oarsmen on the eight seating rowing boat, and it kind of flashes back between his childhood to young adulthood, and then his time from the time he was a freshman in college making the rowing team to when he competes in the Olympics in 1936. It's a really good book. I would recommend it. I feel like it's one of those books that has something for everybody. It has the historical aspect of, these guys competed in the Olympics and they ended up winning gold. It has a little bit of romance mixed in. It's got like a tragic story of how Joe grew up. It tells about his childhood and how he lived through the Great Depression and how he was abandoned as a child by his parents when he was I think he was 15. His stepmother had his father pretty much exile him because there was too many mouths to feed, and they just packed up one day and left. So it's got just like a little bit of something for everybody. So I really would recommend the book. It's a really good read. I did read it cover to cover, as it tells the story of how they combined students from the freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior rowing crews to make their 8 rowers that ended up competing in the Olympics from the University of Washington. I used the book for a lesson plan in the terms of it does talk a great deal about what it was like living during the Great Depression, and there is a standard for 5th grade students that reads, "Explain cause and effects of the Great Depression on the people of the United States." And so there's an excerpt from the book that talks about Joe after after his dad and his stepmom and his half siblings had all packed up and left. He was left with no money. He had a car. His father, it had been ran over by the town's mayor, and so his father had given him the old wrecked car to learn how to repair. So he did have it, and he had a few pieces of furniture in the home, and she had left just a few things of food. But it just talked about what he had to do in order to survive. He ended up foraging in the woods, and he illegally poached salmon to be able to sell to people in town, and lied and said that he had caught it legally so that he could sell it. And he would exchange milk. He had cows, and he had a few chickens. So he was just able to make a living off of basically bartering through the times of the Depression, and he would just work like low-end jobs. And so I would like to use the lesson plan, or use it in my lesson plan as a way of talking about how he made use of what he had during the Depression, and what students know, because I know my great-grandmother would tell us stuff about how she lived through the Great Depression. She would not throw anything away. And so part of my lesson plan, I would like students to think about how you could turn household items into other things. Like, people used to store their money in coffee cans, or they would use coffee cans to collect bacon grease so that they could fry other things. And so just how resourceful that the people were when there was no other option is kind of where I would like my lesson plan to head. So, like I said, I would recommend the book. I really did enjoy it because, like I said, it has just like a little bit of something for everybody. Um, and it's just a really good read, and it's really interesting to see how they went from just being the sons of just ordinary people that went to do something extraordinary.